Okay.
Well, hello everybody. We're live, and I'm so very excited to be back with the new season of Architecture Talk Tank. We had a bit of a break for the holidays, for the summer, and now starting again with a series of new exciting guests. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining. And it's as if a celebration of starting a new season wouldn't be enough. Today's is also a 50th episode, which is absolutely amazing. And my guest is Paul Seletsky. Paul was working for SOM as their digital design director for many years, and now he's running his own practice, which is called ArcSphere. And today he's joining us to talk a little bit about BIM, and we're going to go through topics about this. So tune in into this conversation. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining me today at Architecture Talk Tank.
It's a
How are
pleasure.
you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be invited by you.
Thank you so much for finding the time. So prior to this conversation, you sent me a paper you wrote about digital design, which was very informative. And I think for a lot of people that are still getting introduced to that topic, it would be great to read. So I will put the link to it as it was published at AAC Bytes, which is a magazine devoted to technology and architecture. But we will still talk a little bit about the expertise in that article. So it really struck me in your introduction in the article, you talk about 4 manifestations of digital transformation. And I myself am tackling one of those manifestations by basically helping architects communicate better online. So it's very much about all the communications and working with the internet to create network and connections. It's one of the manifestations, but they go deeper. Would you elaborate a little bit for us?
You would like me to elaborate on the connections?
Actually, on the 4 manifestations of digital transformation.
On the 4 manifestations. Well, I wrote this essay in 2005 when I had just started with SOM, and BIM really, commercially came about with Autodesk's purchase of Revit in 2003, I believe. So before that, Revit was its own company, and before that, it was McDonnell Douglas had a product that evolved into Revit. And so when I wrote it, I was trying to look at where the future would be, because architects have really been, I would say, stuck in representation rather than any type of simulation. And so I tried to look past going into representation and going into where the model could lead us, which would be into a realm that is now coming into a big play, which is the digital twin. And if you think of that, it really does touch into the areas that I wrote about, which is where we're using the model not just to produce drawings, but we're using the model as a means of constructing the actual building. So we're no longer just drawing lines, and we're taking components that we might put into a building, and they're coming from a similar library in Revit or other tools. CATIA could be ArchiCAD, could be MicroStation, but these are now libraries representing the actual components that we're building with. So the idea ultimately becomes, can we design and understand the performance of how these designs will work, and what happens after the building is built? And especially now in the area of energy use and of sustainability, how can we show that what we've designed actually measures up to what we're saying it does? And beyond that, can we create an archive of data where we see projects that we've done and how they've performed? and we can use that historical data to inform our future designs. But what struck me primarily about what we do with our models or with our drawings is actually, I meant to say with our designs, is that we'll typically, as an architect or as architects, will design something and then we'll test it. So if you think of, let's say, a high rise, a tall building, we will design it, we'll design the shapes, we'll see what we like, and then we'll do a wind tunnel study or the structural engineering studies to make sure it's standing up properly, or it can resist the forces of wind and so on. But what we don't do is we don't take these things into the actual design process itself. So this is what I would call there's post-rational versus pre-rational. Post-rational is to say, you've designed it, now test it. Pre-rational is to say, here's what you're starting to design, what factors can come into play. It's like driving a car. You have a dashboard, and depending on how hard you press on the pedal, you're going to use more gas, and the dashboard is going to tell you that. So similarly, why not be able to see what you're designing and how much energy it potentially could use while you're designing it? Maybe it needs to be modified. Maybe the massing needs to be different to accommodate the local, the micro, and the macro environmental conditions. So this is really going above and beyond what we do. And I would dare say that I don't believe now, 16 years later, that the architects are going to do this. That is unfortunate. What I saw or what I imagined would happen is that this would revitalize the profession, and it would give us standing to say, look, you can hire a designer, quote unquote, to design the look of your building. But what differentiates a designer from an architect? And in fact, there were several buildings built in Lower Manhattan where it was designed, let's say, by someone in the fashion industry or someone known as a designer, but not known as architects. And so, where does our standing, where do our credentials as architects really differentiate us from just pure design? And that's what I'm still really concerned about today. I don't believe architects are taking this up. I recently had an opportunity to speak to one of my old colleagues from SOM, who's no longer there, and he's actually leading a very large US architecture firm. And I asked him, do you think we made a difference using BIM? That we went above and beyond? And he replied, no, I don't. We're just using it as a means to advancing representation. In other words, we're coming out with drawing sets faster. Maybe they're a little bit better coordinated, but the services we're providing do not go beyond that. It's a very traditional means of delivery of information, and there's no risk involved. And architects are very risk averse, and that's where you get to the saying, no, those who take the risks get the rewards.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've given you a very long answer to a short question.
No, it's actually super insightful, and thank you. In your paper, you mentioned as well that BIM can revolutionize the way we work together and collaborate with each other. Do you find that that indeed happened, and that architects used it appropriately in the last however long BIM has been around, and actually stepping into different offices to be used as a design tool, and has it improved our collaboration within design, within teams?
Well, That's hard for me to say. I know there are some well-known firms in London and New York and in China that are utilizing it in a very good manner. I mean, we're coming up with designs that uh, were inconceivable without these tools formally. Um, I know that there are firms out there who are working better with engineers in terms of integrating the models,
Mm.
but the question we have to ask is it just integrating the models, or are there services that we're missing that we could potentially create? I don't know, for example, that an Amazon type of, let's say, data inquiry exists for the building industry. I know I want to buy a pair of shoes. Can I get competitive pricing on those shoes? Can I understand when I will receive those shoes? So I need to be able to track where they are in the supply chain. And today we're talking about how the pandemic has really impacted our supply chains. But if I'm ordering components for a building, let's say I have a 50-story tower, uh, 45 of which are, let's say, rentable apartments. So, or 50 floors of rentable apartments in a 55-story building. Let's say I have 4 apartments for each of those floors. Now I have what 200 units that I need to buy toilets for, or I need to buy sinks or doorknobs for. Who is procuring all of this, and are they getting me the best pricing? If I'm the owner, then I want to know. If I'm an owner's rep, that's really my job, and that's where I see the opportunities going to. The owner's reps are the ones who are going to procure this for the building. Maybe it's based, and it likely is based on what the architect has specified. But now you have an opportunity for the owner's rep to say, I want to get the best pricing. I'm the gatekeeper here. And I want to make sure I know the delivery dates. And that information now gets integrated into the model itself. So all the parties involved in that building design are getting to see, when the delivery of certain things come into play. And there are certain building elements, such as gravel, which goes into every project to put the sidewalks into or on top of, that are literally, they're tradable commodities and their prices fluctuate. Steel
Mm.
is definitely one of those things you're not going to be able to order off of a catalog. It has
Mm.
to be fabricated, and it has to, and which company produces that steel has to be chosen. And there are trade tariffs involved. So how do you factor the purchase of steel or the purchase of gravel into the project? Can that be tied to the model? I know, for example, I'm going to have a certain amount of gravel based on the project. Can I link that entity to the marketplace to see exactly? It's like getting a flight to Europe. I know the prices fluctuate. It's a market condition. And if I go on to Google, I could see how the prices actually have fluctuated over time. Should I wait and see if I can get a better price for the flight, or should I buy it now? And those are areas of data which do pertain to what has been called the digital twin.
Mm-hmm.
So we take the model as basically the baby conceived, and then we're watching the baby grow up into an adult, and then the baby is no longer with the family, it's now independent. And how is it doing? And then what happens after that? It's all of this is monitoring the health of the baby, monitoring the health of the building. And just like we have with medicine, we want to know if some conditions are arising that we should be aware of. Is there a pipe that's going to burst? Are there lights that need to be changed? And so initially we start looking at the prices of these components or commodities, and then we want to understand their performance. And then we want to look at the historical data. Does
Mm,
something run in the family? Is it in the DNA? Is it something that we can prevent in the future?
mm.
So
So there's
there you have the digital twin, and that's one of the things I talked about in the article. It's the information coming into the model, and the information is changing, and the model is changing. And if the model is changing in the design, is that impacting the actual building as well? It's a bidirectional process, but then it also takes another dimension in terms of historical comparative information.
Mhm. And all of this simulation happens before the building is built.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, all of this simulation happens before the building is built.
Well, the simulation, like designing a car, the car manufacturers are using simulation to see how well the car crashes, whether it helps the passengers or hurts the passengers. So
Mhm,
the idea is that, again, this simulation is taking place as we design. And
mhm,
so at SOM, we actually had a project where we were working with uh, students from Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey at that
mhm,
time. And we created a project called the View Calculator. So let's say I had a tower or a property in Midtown Manhattan, and I was developing a residential tower. Now, do I just make it a strict geometry? Is it a rectangular tower like every tower is? Is it a Seagram's type of shape? Or am I saying, well, listen, depending on which views the apartments we're designing are facing, there might be greater value looking at Central Park versus looking at New Jersey versus looking down to Lower Manhattan or across the river to Brooklyn and Queens.
mhm,
And if I am the developer, the value the architect can give me is a design that might bring me more apartments, let's say facing Central Park,
mhm,
because I can get more money for that investment. So maybe the shape of the building is no longer based on what the architect likes and is going to convince the owner of, but rather what the architect likes, as well as can say to the owner, look, if we shape the building this way, you're going to get more apartments facing Central Park. Hence, your revenue for this design will be more valuable to you. And we don't do that. We just, we look at generative parametric geometry as something that is, wow, look at what we can do from the computer, as opposed to where are we providing value to our clients. I mean, it goes
mhm.
back to Vitruvius. It's you know, firmness, commodity, and delight. So
Absolutely.
sure, we're focused on delight, and we're focused on firmness, but the commodity, I would dare say, is not what we're providing. The commodity, the komodos, is the convenience, and it's also what is it providing, what is it offering. We know firmness, it can stand as an engineering matter, and we know as delight it can provide us with the fancy geometry. But if we go to the middle part, the commodity, The commodity is information. And the most successful companies, the FANG, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, maybe less so, but certainly Google and who am I missing? Facebook, Apple, Google are taking information and they understand the value of information. We haven't done that yet, and that's really where the digital twin is giving us all the information. We start with the design using a building information model, which is basically geometry tied to a database.
Mm-hmm.
The database is what drives these most successful companies. It's looking at patterns of behavior, of purchase, who our friends are, who likes us, who doesn't like us, and and it's and it's monetizing that. We,
Mm-hmm.
we don't do that.
So interesting. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It was absolutely lovely hearing you talk about this, and also it was great to see this sort of difference and evolution, I would say, between the article and our conversation today, which is obviously would be 6 years ahead,
It
right?
doesn't, it doesn't matter. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about having the ability to make the smartest decisions, not for
Mm,
oneself, but for everyone else.
absolutely. So, guys, I'm curious how many of you uses BIM and have heard about digital twins and uses these tools to make better decisions in design. Let us know in the comments below. And Paul, thank you so much for joining.
My
If people want to connect with you, where do they find you?
Well, they can take my first initial and last name, and it's at Gmail, which is easy to remember, or my ArcSphere, which is ArcSphere, first initial last name at that address.com.
Excellent.
No H after the C, no arch, it's arc.
Check out the website as well, guys. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure
Thank you.
talking to you, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And to all the listeners, we're starting with a new season of Architecture Talk Tank. And just make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube, because that's where all the talks are posted ahead of time. So you can set up reminders and follow up and watch us live as we talk with incredible experts this season. So go to Sarah Colata at YouTube and just subscribe. Thank you so much all for tuning in, listening, and thank you for joining. And everyone have a lovely weekend. Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.